Hi friends, it's Miss Kim and I am here with your Exploring Famous Scientists lesson. This will be for 2 weeks. We briefly, before we left on this past Thursday, started to talk about our next scientist that we were going to be learning about. His name is William Kamkwamba, and we talked just briefly about him, so I kind of wanted to go over what we talked about again, just to refresh your memory and just to continue on with that lesson. So William is born 1987, and he's born in Malawi, Africa. He's born into a family that is pretty poverty stricken. That the village that they live in is a small village, and there is considerable amount of poverty. It's a small farming village. So William obviously is still a living scientist. He's only 32 years old, so still very much active as a scientist and an inventor. So his family he's one of 7 children, and they're farmers. They rely on farming for their survival, for their food, for their money, for everything they need. They rely on farming. Growing up as a little boy, he's very much interested in how things work, and he spends a lot of time when he's not working on the farm playing with his friends. And because they don't have a lot of things, and there's not like a lot of stores to go visit where he lives or anything like that, and not the money to purchase the things, him and his friends start to experiment with like making things. So they would make toys, and they would make things to keep them occupied or take things apart, made out of found objects and recycled objects. He also is dabbling in radios, because they don't have TVs in their homes. His home in particular, and the home of the farmers around him, the only source of light they don't have electricity in their home, so the only source of light they have is from kerosene lamps, which are kind of dirty and produce a lot of soot and things like that, and doesn't give you a really good, it's kind of a dim light too. But so for entertainment purposes, a lot of people have radios, and so you can't just go buy a new radio necessarily if your radio breaks or stops working. So he starts dabbling in figuring out how to repair radios for himself, for his friends, for neighbors. And he's actually going to school during this time, but they don't have really like a public school system there. So it is a tuition-based public-private school system. So it's cheaper, much cheaper than like going to a private school here in America would be, but there's still a cost involved. So he's entering his freshman year of high school, and his family is where they live is struck by a really terrible famine, and there's just no resources, there's no food, there's no money. His tuition for the year is $80 US. And his family is just unable to afford that tuition, and so he's forced to drop out of school. But he doesn't want to give up on his education, because he has this very active mind and this active imagination that really wants to know and learn more. And so he kind of makes a deal with one of the teachers at the school to let him still have access to the school library, so that he can continue to go and check out books and kind of continue his education on his own. And while he's doing this, as he's checking out books, he starts to find that he's very interested in the books that are about like electronics and fixing things and how to make things, books on gadget creations, and in particular, very much electronics and how electronics work. One of the books he checks out is all about alternative forms of energy. So alternative forms of energy means like an alternative to coal, or oil, or nuclear. And so he decides that he is going, after reading this book, that he is going to figure out a solution for his family and his neighbors. And so he decides he's going to create a wind turbine. So he starts building this wind turbine. This is literally built out of stuff most people would think was trash that he finds laying around. He makes a turbine that's about 5 meters tall. He makes this turbine out of like all kinds of crazy stuff. Broken bicycle parts. He uses trees, rubber trees that are growing in the area. He uses old shock absorbers that he's found. He creates a circuit breaker to go along with the wind turbine so that he can kind of control what he's powering, which is totally made completely out of just like old nails and magnets and things, wires that he finds, bits, pieces laying around. But with this, he's successful with this turbine. He's like able to generate electricity. And so he's able to generate enough electricity that he can charge his friend's cell phones and power like a few light bulbs, like 5 light bulbs. Building on having success with this, he decides he wants to obviously create a bigger wind turbine, something that can really be more beneficial to his area. So he builds, and in particular, he wants to make sure that this wind turbine is tall enough that it's above the trees and any buildings that are nearby so that he can really harness any power of the wind that is coming through. So his goals with this wind turbine are to do a couple of things. He wants to be able to power an electric water pump. He wants to provide electricity to like 5 houses in the area. So he builds this much taller, like 12 meters high wind turbine this time. And it's really successful. So they're able to power this electric water pump, which leads to a successful crop, which is really important because remember, they've been experiencing a lot of famine and there's not enough food, there's not enough resources. And part of being able to be a successful farmer is having, water to your crops. So when this becomes successful, obviously a lot of people start paying attention to it. A lot of the local farmers and people want to know more. How do they do this? How do they, create their own success, create their own electricity so that they can be better farmers? It also draws the interest of a lot of journalists, and it's not easy to find him. They have to really search and track him down because he's not like a famous guy. He's just this kid really doing this. But eventually some journalists do make contact with him, and in particular, one of those is somebody from the TED Talk series. And so he's invited to do a TED Talk in 2007 about what he's done, about inventing and his life. And he's also invited in 2009 to a thing called Maker Faire Africa, which, if you guys don't know, we have Maker Fairs here in the United States. We have a full-fledged Maker Faire. We're one of the lucky cities that has a full Maker Faire here in Louisville. That happens every year. And it's just a get-together really of a lot of different inventive minds, all different kinds of technology people, schools, kids who just are interested in making. And so he's invited to that. And that also really, when he gets this opportunity to be around all of these like-minded people who are creating new things and trying to figure out solutions to problems, it just continues to inspire him. After he does the TED Talk, there's a lot of interest, and a lot of people who have resources are really inspired by his story. And so they offer to send him to school to finish his education. So he actually ends up attending college and graduates from Dartmouth in the United States in New Hampshire in 2014. He goes on to write a book called The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind, and Then a documentary was produced just last year in 2019, I'm sorry, it was in 2013, called William and the Windmill. In 2013, he's also named one of Time Magazine's 30 people to watch who are changing the world under 30. In 2019, which is what I was saying a second ago, they make a movie based on his book that's called The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. And it is, I believe, available. It was available on Netflix, so hopefully it's still available on there if you want to watch that. He goes on, he's still creating and inventing, and particularly creating and inventing things with a mindset of making them accessible to all people, and empowering people who maybe don't normally have the access, or who are living in poverty or restricted areas, to be able to learn about technology. So he's worked on many projects in his home country, on things like creating sources of clean water, malaria prevention, a deep water well that has a solar powered pump, and drip irrigation systems. All of these things kind of are helping to keep people safe and helping to enable the farmers in this area. He currently, right now, is working for a company called WiderNet, which is an organization that's working to promote, to develop like a technology curriculum that can be available to all people everywhere. And it'll be his goals with that, he says, are to bridge the gap between knowing and doing. So a little bit about wind turbines and how wind turbines actually function and work. So a wind turbine is a way to take energy and turn it into electricity that can be used. And it's an alternative method. Most of the energy, the electricity that we use in the United States in particular, is from coal or oil. In other parts of the world, they use a lot of nuclear powered energy. So the idea is that you can harness the wind, you can use the wind to make electricity. When wind blows in these wind turbines, which are just very, really kind of like simplistic designs. It's a tall tower that is topped with blades. If you guys have seen a windmill, a wind turbine is a windmill. The blades are connected to a shaft that runs through there. And when the wind blows, it causes the blades to spin, and they turn the shaft, and the shaft provides power to a machine that's called a generator, which produces the electricity. If you guys remember, this is very, very similar to when we studied Nikola Tesla in the very beginning of the year. We made those little motors, very like the exact same thing. So you probably, if you've ever traveled from Kentucky to Chicago, you have probably passed a wind farm with all these giant turbines on them that are generating electricity. So we do have some wind powered electricity here in America, and not too far away from us. Like I said, wind turbines are the same kind of idea as windmills, and they used to be called windmills. People have been using this concept for over 1,000 years to create power. 1,000 years ago, they weren't creating electricity with it, but they were using it to help power to like their mills. So like with water, and the windmill would power the machine that pulled their water up. So the idea, wind is a type of solar energy. It can be used, like I said, in place of other energy sources that are a lot dirtier. like coal and oil, or not as safe like nuclear. Basically, it's caused by three different things: the sun unevenly heating the atmosphere, irregularities in the Earth's surface, and the rotation of the Earth that causes us to have this wind. So a wind turbine turns wind energy into electricity, like I said. It uses the force from the rotor blades, so those big blades that you see spinning around on the wind turbines. When the wind flows across the blades, so if you imagine the blades are spinning and the wind is sort of flowing across the blades, the air pressure on one side of the blade decreases. And the difference in air pressure across the two sides of the blades causes lift and drag. And this is something we talked about again when we did our motors with Nikola Tesla. The force of the lift is stronger than the force of the drag, and it causes the rotor to spin. So your lesson, the way I'm going to do this is going to be to link you guys to a couple of different things, resources that I would like for you to view to help you understand this inventor. So the first is going to be his TED Talk, which I think is really great, and it's free. You can watch it on YouTube. I'm also going to link you to a really good, in my Google Drives, that is a PowerPoint presentation on how wind turbines work. And then I'll also link a couple of other resources to you in my Google Drive. One is going to be a document on William Kamkwamba that will, you actually were given this last week, but I know it's at school, so it will, it's got a little biography, and then there are some questions for you to answer on that as well. I will update your parents. I'm working on trying to figure out a project that you guys can do from your home on these windmills, but trying to figure out something that's accessible for everybody with materials that you already have at home. So I'm working on that, and if I figure it out, hopefully I will email your parents with your project on that. But for now, watch the videos and watch the PowerPoint presentation and read your bio and answer the questions on William. All right, see you guys soon, hopefully, and have a great week.